For today's tutorial, we're going to be learning how to create this epic neon infinity loop. So it's fairly simple, so we're not going to waste any more time and we're going to directly start with the tutorial. In the default scene, we're going to press X and delete our default cube. Then we'll press Shift A and search for a curved circle, and then we can press Tab to go into edit mode and come up to the options of segment over here and just press it and click subdivide. Now to create the infinity, essentially we're going to be creating an optical illusion. So we're going to select the two opposite ends of the corners and just grab it on the Z and move it up by a little bit. So let's go up by maybe 0.4 and then select the other two corner opposite vertices and then grab it on the Z and move it down by minus 0.4. And essentially this is the infinity shape that we're getting. Now remember, it's not going to be that smooth initially, so you're just going to have to smoothen it out by selecting these and then rotating them till they become nice. So again, you can press 1 and 3 to go into the different views. So right now I'm pressing 1 to go to the front orthographic view, then I'll select the one at the back and just rotate it till it becomes nice and straight, and then I'll press 3 to go to the side views, and even for these just rotate them till they become flush with the rest of the shape, and that way you get a nice smooth infinity shape. Now that you've done this, you can go to the object data properties down here, increase the resolution to 64 so that it becomes completely smooth, and under the geometry you can go ahead and increase the bevel depth to something like 0.04 or lesser. We'll start off with 0.2 and we might change it later on. After that, we can grab it on the Z and just move it up and then press Shift A, Mesh Plane to add in our ground plane. So scale that up. We'll scale it up by something like 20 and that should be it. After that, you can go ahead and place your camera. So just select our camera, press Alt G, Alt R to clear location and rotation, then RX 90, then grab it on the Y axis and move it back a little bit, then grab it on the Z and just move it up a little bit. Then you can press 0 to go into your camera view, and this is what we have. Then just again, grab it to move it around till you're happy with what you get. So I'm going to go with something like this. Now we can actually start off the texturing. So before starting off the texturing, we'll set all of the animation defaults. So let's go to our render properties, switch on bloom, switch on screen space reflections, and then go to your output properties, change the frame rate to 30 frames per second, change the end frame to 150 so that it becomes a 5-second long animation. And then for the output, change it to whatever folder you want. File format is going to be FFmpeg video. And for the encoding, we're going to change the container to MPEG-4 and the output quality to perceptually lossless. Now change the viewport display to rendered so that you can actually see what's happening. And we can go to the world properties and change the color all the way to black. Along with that, we don't need the light, but we'll remove the light after we actually give our Bezier circle its own material. Also, if you want this to be a little rounder, you can always go into edit mode and make changes accordingly. So I'm just going to take these two handles, switch it from median point to individual origins and just scale them down a little bit, and that will actually make these edges a lot rounder. So now for texturing, we need the shader editor. So we're going to click and drag from the junction of these two windows to create a new window. And then we're going to change it from the 3D viewport to the shader editor. Now we can press new to add in a new material, and we can select the principal BSDF and press X to delete it. After that, we're going to press Shift A and search for an emission node as well as a transparent node, because we actually don't want this to be seen all the way around. So to decide which areas will be transparent and which one's going to be emission, we're going to actually need a gradient node, and to actually mix these two together, we're going to search for a mix node, and it has to be a mix shader node. Then plug the transparent into the top socket and the emission into the bottom socket, and then plug the output of the mix shader into the material output. Now we can bring these two slightly down and pass the output of the gradient texture into the factor. After that, you see you can't really tell where the gradient is. So for better control, we'll press Shift A and search for a color ramp and plug that in right after the gradient texture. Then you can bring the black in, and you can see that that's how the gradient is going, and that's not how we want the gradient to be. So to change the gradient, the first thing that we'll do is change it from linear to radial. And that way we know from the center, the gradient is going to go around, which is exactly what we want. However, the problem is we don't see it yet. So it must be using the wrong coordinates. So with the node wrangler switched on, we'll press Ctrl T to add in a texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And we'll change it from generated to object. And to actually see the texture coordinates correctly, we'll press Ctrl Shift click on the color ramp with the node wrangler switched on to actually see the gradient. Now we can see the black here and it goes all the way to white. However, we want a little portion of it to actually be completely black. So we'll just increase the black in just like that. After which, to animate this, we can just play around with the Z rotation. So rotating it in the negative axis moves it in what seems like a forward direction. So for now, we'll keep it at 0 and move on with actually figuring out the emission as well as the factor. Now that we have the factor, we can actually do the same thing for the emission strength. So we'll press Shift T on the color ramp and plug this gradient texture into the second color ramp, and this is what's going to drive the color of the emission node. And to actually see it, we'll Control Shift click the mix shader with the node wrangler to remove the viewer node and plug that directly into the material output. Now we'll give it the colors that we want. So let's just add in a few more markers and play around with the colors. So the first color, or the brightest color, will make it maybe a nice reddish color, after which we'll take the next slider, make the value all the way up, and then give it a purplish color maybe. The next one could be a nice blue, so bring it up and make it blue. This one could be an even lighter blue, and that could be enough. However, I also want to change this from linear to ease to just make the gradient a little smoother. The next thing is that we need to control the actual strength of the emission. So to do that, if we switch off overlays, we see what it currently looks like. And we also see that the transparent areas are not actually becoming transparent. So to fix that, we'll go to the material properties down here and change the blend mode from opaque to alpha hashed. Now the reason we're using alpha hashed is because if we use alpha blend, we don't get any reflections. And if we use alpha clip, you won't get this nice gradient fall off. It'll either be completely present or completely transparent. So to get this gradient as well as the reflections, we're going to have to keep the blend mode at alpha hashed. So once we have that set, we have to play around with the strength. So the first thing is I want the gradient to be really bright and then fade off to nothingness. And I want it to be an exponential fall off. So we can't do that with a simple multiply node, because if we use a math node and set it to multiply, you'll realize that everything becomes that much stronger and we don't get too much of a fall off. However, if we change it from multiply to power, you'll see that since the output of the color ramp goes from 0 to 1, and a fraction smaller than 1 raised to a positive exponent becomes even smaller. So more and more things get cut off till nothing is left, and that's not what we want. And that's why if we actually reduce the power to negative, the areas that should be gone become extremely bright. So the way we'll fix this is by converting this to a multiply node initially, and then duplicating the multiply node and changing it from multiply to power, and then plugging the value of the multiply node into the base of the power node. Now we can have the first multiply node to be something like 5, and then the next one to have an exponent of something like 3. And the output of this has to be added to the original multiply node so that the values that are less than 1 even after the multiplication still remain present and don't go down to 0. So for that, we're going to again duplicate the math node and this time change it to add, and just add these two values and plug this into the strength of the emission node. Now, if we just play around with the rotation, we get the animation exactly how we want it to be. So what we have to do is now remove the light by either hiding it from viewport and renders, or selecting it and pressing delete to delete it completely, and then giving a material to the plane. So we'll select the plane and press new to add in a new material, and we'll go ahead and just increase the metallicness all the way to 1 and reduce the roughness to something like 0.3. After that, we'll go ahead and select our Bezier circle and just finish off the animation. So go to frame 0, and under the rotation, change the Z value to 0 and press I, and then go all the way to frame 150 and then change the Z value to -360 and then press I. Now the default interpolation is Bezier. We don't want that, but we can't see any of the keyframes. So let's select the node so that the keyframes appear and then press T linear. And now we'll get a nice linear animation. Of course, the colors can be changed at any point of time, and I might change that after the tutorial is done. However, the next thing that we have to do is go back to the floor and play around with the roughness. Instead of having the roughness at a constant 0.3, we can add in some textures. So let's search for a noise texture and a Voronoi texture and plug the color of the noise texture into the vector of the Voronoi texture and the distance or the color of the Voronoi texture into a color ramp. So let's just search for a color ramp and plug the color into the factor and the output into the roughness. After that, you're going to have to go ahead and play around with the scale on the noise texture and the Voronoi textures to get something desirable. Of course, we don't want any portion to be completely reflective, so we're just going to increase the black value to something like 0.2, which is going to be the most reflective areas, and the white value, we don't want it to be completely non-reflective, so we're going to change this to 0.6. And then just by playing around with the scales, you can get different sorts of floors and reflections. Now you can always take the camera and rotate it around to get different compositions and different types of reflections. But all of that is your personal preference, and I think that's all there is to this particular tutorial. So the last thing that you have to do is press render animation. Beyond the floor, I also happened to just duplicate it to add in a back wall, side walls, and a ceiling. That way, there's far more reflections happening and the entire scene just becomes a lot brighter, which looks so much cooler in my opinion. There's really nothing else that was done. This entire change is just from adding in the side walls, the back wall, and the ceiling. Hopefully you liked this particular tutorial and can create some really cool animations that you can use in various situations. If you have any questions, do comment them down below. I'll answer all of them. And if you like the video, be sure to check out my other videos because I release one tutorial every single day. If you find this helpful, do subscribe because it helped me out a lot. And thank you so much for watching. Until the next video comes out, don't forget to stay creative.